Before we jump into today's episode, a quick note to say that open wide conversations are for interest only. We don't provide medical or clinical advice or legal or employee relations advice. Please do consult with a qualified healthcare professional if you have specific concerns related to your mental health or any medical conditions. Open Wide is recorded on the land of the Boonwurrung people. We acknowledge the richness and diversity of Indigenous communities and the wisdom of storytelling that has been passed down from generation to generation. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Hi, I'm Natalie Phillips-Mason, and this is the Open Wired podcast. Through respectful curiosity, we have candid conversations that explore human diversity and how to create inclusive ecosystems for all minds, bodies, and identities. My guests are change makers who are doing the practical, often unglamorous work to make inclusion real. We are streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. My guest today is Karen McCarthy. She's a keynote speaker and a board member in the not-for-profit sector. Karen believes in the inherent dignity of people and is committed to reducing the impact of factors that limit how freely we're able to enjoy full and flourishing lives. Karen works to strengthen and steer organisations to break down barriers for and advance the rights of people who are vulnerable to discrimination and disadvantage. Karen loves books, ballet, and stretching the boundaries of what she's capable of, which is a really nice intro. So Karen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks very much for having me, Natalie.
I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation, but I might just want to start with the way that you describe yourself, and that is as someone who has known adversity. I'm just wondering if you'd share a little bit more of your story with us to give us some context for today.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. I have just passed the 10-year anniversary of what is pretty uncontroversially the worst day of my life, period, really. In my mid-30s, I was found to have a tumour on my pituitary gland, which is kind of right in the middle of your head, in behind your eyes. Your optic nerves run over the top of it. It wasn't cancerous, it was just a bothersome growth. And during a surgery to remove it, there were all manner of complications. I suffered a traumatic brain injury, almost complete destruction of my optic nerves. So I was, in those early days, predicted that I wouldn't survive. Ultimately, I was in hospital for 6 months, initially kind of in and out of surgeries, chasing the tail of those difficulties as they emerged. And then I was discharged to the brain injury rehabilitation unit here in Brisbane with the incredible support of both the medical profession and family and friends. I made a recovery that no one expected. A couple of years later, I made it back to my job as a lawyer in the Queensland government. Since then, while I've moved out of legal practice, I have found my way into various other lines of work, including board work, that I've found really satisfying. The vision that I'm left with now is sort of indistinct shades of grey. One eye doesn't function at all. The other, as I say, shades of grey and indistinct.
Thank you for sharing that. That's quite an incredible story. I wanted to ask you, because I've spoken with many people with disability within my own network, and the experience of acquiring a disability as opposed to the experience being born with a disability can have very, very different implications. You acquired your disability, if that's terminology that you're comfortable with. Can you make any comments around the acquisition of disability as opposed to being born with disability, and what your experience has been, particularly as someone who has been in a profession like the legal profession where you are relying a lot on your vision? How has that been for you?
Humbling, I think, would be the one word that would be best placed to kind of cover the whole experience. Going into this surgery, I was advised of the potential complications, but it was a little like reading the list of potential complications in the Panadol box, right? Like there are so many of them. You just kind of go, that's nothing that I need to be concerned about. prior to sustaining these injuries, it didn't even occur to me, really, that I would ever need to adjust to living with a disability. In those early days, when I first came home after that prolonged hospital stay, I was physically quite significantly weakened. So there was a lot of focus in those early days on sit down on a chair, stand up again, sit down, stand up, to just strengthen myself physically to regain my balance. But when I kind of got around to rebuilding the skills, I engaged with Vision Australia and the amazing people who work there. And for the most part, the people who taught me how to use voiceover on a mobile phone or how to engage with computers and other devices using screen readers were completely blind. I was incredibly envious of them. I guess because I was at a point where I was really struggling to look at this mountain that I had to climb in terms of regaining skills and coming to terms with how I was going to function in the world, to engage with people and the opportunities that still laid open for me. And here were these people who had far less vision than me, who were so incredibly capable and confident and competent at things that I could only hope to one day master. Now, 10 years later, and I can say I do not have even 1/10 of the skills of those people. I think there are both challenges and also benefits to acquiring a disability further down the track. I mean, I have 37 years of memories of clear vision to draw on and to look back on, which obviously people who have never had clear vision wouldn't have. There's also just a little bit of a mismatch in the sense that I still consider myself to be quite a visual learner.
It's a really good example of how we just need to try and change our perspectives in terms of when we do talk about visual information. I actually just wanted to ask you on that point. I'm really interested in the assistive technology that you have. So you talked about screen readers, for example. So you are able, because clearly you're still active, you are part of the board, you work, you engage in material and in visual information or information that comes in to you visually. Can you describe to us how that assistive technology works to enable you to do the work that you do?
Primarily, the one piece of assistive technology, if you could call it that I rely on every day is a long white cane, right? I mean, those sorts of really physical things, I think we can forget that they are assistive technologies. That's how I navigate the world. I actually have quite an interesting story. There are various apps and things that help with navigation. I've never gone to the extent of the Meta glasses that apparently these days you can get with like a running commentary of, you know, you're passing a blue door on your left, there are cars passing on your right. I just thought that was too much information to be coming into me, but also I haven't really looked into them. So it's possible that they are a better option than perhaps I have engaged with as yet. But yes, I went to Toowoomba with my husband a couple of weeks ago. He went off to do his work for an hour or two and I was sitting in a cafe and I thought, you know, I think I might just go for a bit of a walk. I can see that there's a park nearby. And so I put one AirPod in my ear and off I go. And it's saying, you'll reach your destination. Your destination will be on your right in 500 meters. The destination will be on your right in 600 meters. The destination will be on your right in 800 meters.
Oh, no, you've gone the wrong direction.
I'm thinking there is something going wrong here. And so, yes, sure enough, I turn around. It counts me back down. But I mean, little things like that. We may be in the age of AI, but not all the technology is particularly clever. The screen readers that I use, so I use an iPhone. The built-in voiceover on the iPhone is fantastic. It's really intuitive, and there are various gestures that you use on the screen to navigate around, tap and double tap, and you use all of the buttons that are there in completely different ways. And that's just built in all the time. Everybody has access to that. On the computer, there is I think it's a Microsoft program called NVDA, which is like non-visual display alternative. I think I've got that right. That was actually a program I understand was put together, developed by a fellow who lives in Brisbane and was ultimately picked up by Microsoft. And it is built in on all Microsoft devices. I don't use that. There is a specific program that you can get called JAWS, or Job Access with Speech. It's kind of like keyboard shortcuts, if you've ever used those, as opposed to your mouse, on steroids.
Right.
I think I probably use about 10% of the capability of that program. But it's pretty incredible in terms of orienting you to where you are on a particular page. You can skip through headings, you can skip through links, because I don't think that people necessarily understand that. I think most people visually read at something phenomenal in terms of how many words per minute you can actually read and take in when that is being spoken, even when you have the voiceover speed maxed out so that it just sounds to anybody else like a blah, 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 it's still much slower than reading visually. The need to be able to skip around, for example, a web page is absolutely vital. Having said that, about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it occurred to me that perhaps I wasn't using the vision that I do still have left to its full capacity. So I now have a very large digital magnifier. It can go up to 45 times in terms of, so you put a document in underneath it, and that allows me to physically read documents or labels on products and things. I initially got it and thought, this is fantastic. I'm going to be able to read books again. I don't know whether it's not good enough to read books. I suspect that it's that my own processing speed means that I'm fine to read a 10 or 20 page board pack, but the notion of using it to read a novel is fanciful. Besides,
Right.
we have audiobooks for that.
And I was going to ask you that, you talk about being a book lover. Do you now find that you are relying on audiobooks more so than the ability to read visually?
Yes, so audiobooks, or I am being repaid in spades for teaching my daughters to read as small children, because they now take great delight in reading with me. When my daughter was in the final stages of high school, she came across a space fantasy kind of a series of books. And she said to me, I really think that that you would love this. Well, can I read it to you? And so we spent a just delightful few months where she would look at me at the end of the night and go, "Are you too tired to read?" I would be like, I mean, we can start and I might fall asleep, and then tomorrow night you can just tell me what I missed.
I would love that. I would love my children to read to me. I think that's a beautiful full circle experience.
Yes, it is. It's delightful.
I did want to ask you about work and about the work that you do with the board. So you'd had around 2 decades in law. Was that before you acquired your disability, or was that just in general? So you'd been in the law field for a number of years before you acquired your disability?
Yes. I had worked as a paralegal in a government department from the time I was at university. I was admitted as a barrister when I was 24. I worked in Brisbane, and then my husband and I moved to Perth, and then we moved back to Brisbane, and then we moved to Darwin, and then we moved back to Brisbane. And so I was a prosecutor for a long time, and then I had some time off around the birth of my children. Ultimately, I moved to the Queensland Government, the Crime and Corruption Commission, and that's where I was when I sustained my injury. So I was off for 2 years. I did ultimately do a return to work into a legal role. It was a different role to what I had been doing previously. Previously, I would need to watch video and look at physical exhibits. So I moved into a different area. I lasted at that for probably about 2 years. Ultimately, COVID hit. We all got to go, got sent home. And I suspect that simply the absence of co-located support ultimately made that just far too difficult to continue. I haven't worked as a lawyer since 2020. I started work as a keynote speaker in the intervening period, but then I joined both the board of Queenslanders with Disability Network, or QDN, and most recently I also joined the management committee of a community legal service here in Brisbane. Not in a legal role, like not as a legal advisor, but simply as someone with a background in law, with connections and contacts, and I guess the capacity to express judgment in relation to issues that management committee needs to decide on.
Tell me how your disability then changes or what voice you bring to that management committee and that board when it comes to the work that you do. Obviously, you have great lived experience when it comes to inclusion. Part of this series is around inclusive boards and making sure that we have a number of different voices on boards and on committees. The work that you do, how would you describe the purpose that you have in terms of the work that you do? And we'll talk about your keynote speaking in a minute, but in terms of the role that you play on boards and committees within governance forums, what is your role there and how do you undertake that role?
On the Legal Service Committee, I'm simply a member of the management committee. I don't have any particular leadership position. So it is the LGBTI legal service. I like to joke that I am the token straight white woman named Karen on that board. Because we need to be inclusive in all regards.
Which means you need a Karen. You need
exactly.
a Karen at the table.
You do need a Karen. Yeah, look, and everyone on that management committee, what most people bring a legal background. There are various other kind of professional skills and experience that people bring to that committee. But I like to think that I bring a different perspective, both from the point of view that I'm coming at the issues as a little bit of an outsider, but an outsider who has deep respect and compassion for the issues that are being faced by the community, as well as a real awareness of the voices that aren't in the room. And I think that's what disability, and maybe it is simply getting back to that first question, that you're more aware of it when you have come into the disability community later in life, is an awareness that while, yes, I have a vision impairment and that makes me a person with disability, I'm really have very little awareness of what it's like, for example, to be a wheelchair user or to be a person with an intellectual disability or to have various other of the myriad types of disability that people need to live with. But I am also very conscious of accessibility and of both the physical and the kind of social barriers to full inclusion.
So how important do you think it is to have those voices at the table? Voices in terms of representation. How important is it to have boards that are genuinely and authentically diverse?
I think that it is fundamental that boards that are making decisions that affect a range of people themselves reflect that range of people, that range of experience. You're never going to get perfect representation, but I think simply having different lived experience means that, you ask different questions, you're more inclined to challenge conclusions that a more homogenous board might simply not even occur to them, that they are falling into a bit of a groupthink trap.
Can we talk about allyship? I'm really interested in what allyship looks like for you. We can only talk on behalf of ourselves. Allyship can come in so many different forms, but when we're talking about allyship for communities, whether they be people with disability or any other type of community, what does allyship look like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And can you give us any examples of allyship that you've observed that didn't hit the mark?
I think that ideally, allyship is a little like I have a friend who I have a deep respect and compassion for, but they're not in the room at the moment. The trap, I think, is when you assume that you are able to speak on all topics to any extent for the person that you are supporting or the group that you're looking to support. QDN in particular has a very strong and long-standing commitment to the mantra of nothing about us without us, which is that the whole point that back in the day where disability policy was simply made by people who had, to a greater or lesser extent, simply good wishes for the disability community. The fact of people having that kind of self-determination that says your lived experience is valuable in the making of policy, in the making of decisions, I think is vital. I come into the LGBTI management committee with the point of view of a parent and interested, I guess almost auntie kind of figure, in the sense that through my daughter, I know a lot of young people in that community who don't necessarily have avenues to have their voices heard. And I think it's fantastic to be able to open those doors. Yeah, I guess to kind of raise the questions that those people aren't necessarily in the rooms to raise themselves. Ideally, I would love to see the people whose interests I'm looking to protect actually take up leadership positions themselves in these sorts of organisations.
I just wanted to ask you as one final question for people that might be listening to this episode. What key messages do you want to leave people with based on your experience? And we were going to touch on your keynote speaking as well. And I believe that you speak a lot on the topic of resilience, which is your word. So resilience, what does resilience mean to you?
To me, resilience is sort of synonymous with adaptability, I guess sort of persistence, but also that creativity and adaptability. One of the key messages that I bring to audiences is the idea that just because you can't do it the same doesn't mean you can't do it. That obviously has been fundamental in my own life, having adapted to living with a disability. But I also think that I have seen that it can be incredibly helpful in a range of life and work circumstances. It's the antidote, I think, to hopelessness. I think that idea that simply because one way of doing things becomes unavailable doesn't mean that there aren't other options. And I think that adapting to disability in the various ways that I have had to do, it just illustrates that point in kind of full colour.
I think it's a great message. I think it's a message we need to keep hearing, actually, over and over. I think that doing things differently is certainly what we're about in inclusive change. So I wanted to thank you for sharing with us with honesty and as much about your strength as your vulnerabilities. So I thank you for coming on and having this conversation. We'll make sure that in the episode notes that we give people information about where where to find you, should they be interested in your work. And I think having spoken to you now a few times, your ethos is incredibly important and impactful. So thank you for coming on and sharing so openly with me today.
Oh, look, Natalie, thank you so much for hosting these conversations. I think it's so vital that there be a space for people to share these messages without needing to be in some fancy conference room.
And we're certainly not in a fancy conference room, are we?
Yes, no. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share and for the work that you're doing with this podcast.
Thank you, Karen. If you found value in today's chat, the best way to support the podcast is to share it with a colleague. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And I'm always eager to hear your takeaways. So do drop me a DM on Instagram at Inclusive Change or send me an email. All the links to connect with me and to learn more about today's guests are waiting for you in the episode description. Thanks again for being here, and I'll catch you next time.